warfare has changed.
So what happens when all of Earth's main society is collapsing?
It's really in everyone's best interest that we have a truly global free market system.
Yeah, crazy times in America.
Oh, he's sun maxing. Let's go. Wait, what? What? Welcome. This is the New Earth podcast. I'm Connor Gotro. This is my friend Ellis Hernandez. We are creating this podcast as our contribution to analyzing the transformation of the world as the world progresses from the current state to the new earth. And so what we're going to do is each month we're going to look at what we've found the most interesting news, or anything that we come across in social media that seems to represent the transformation of the earth into the new earth. And we're going to talk about it. We're going to play the clip, and then we're going to give our feedback on it. And that's sort of the nature of this podcast. So this is episode 1.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, the structure of this will be mainly that, and then beforehand we'll probably cover some things from the last month just to give a recap or just talk about it a little more, because there's always more to this unfolding story. But yeah, just talking about the events of this great awakening happening on this earth.
Sounds great. Well, so I guess we'll get started by talking about what the new earth means to us, just a little bit of a preface. You're probably familiar with the idea of the new earth. It's really kind of a coined phrase at this point, referring to the future of humanity, sort of in this utopian kind of idea. But really, to ground it, we can just say that it's humanity's future. You might have heard of the book A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle, kind of along those lines. Great book, by the way, I highly recommend. But so I'll just say that I have a personal mission with regards to what I would like to devote my energy and my life to in order to participate in creating the new earth as I would like to see it, to benefit all of humanity. And so this mission was my idea of refining what could be the most pertinent things to pay attention to, the most pertinent problems humanity faces that we could solve to create the most efficient transformation, the most efficient pathway from this current earth to the new earth. And so those would be primarily 3 things. Number 1 is an ecologically integrated society. So what that entails is transforming the current society from what I would call ecologically divorced into ecologically integrated culturally, as well as far as our physical structures, our society's culture. These 2 things have been largely divorced from nature for the past 200 years, especially as we spend most of our time inside, and now kids don't grow up with a connection to nature. They don't know their local plant species. They're not connected to where their food comes from. They don't really understand ecology on a deeper level. They don't understand that medicine comes from the earth and all of these things. So what I would like to see as an ecologically integrated society is a society in the future where people are living with nature. You could say from a landscape architecture perspective, having our homes, our residential areas, our business areas, and places where we like to spend our time, recreational areas, being more wild, you could say, like rewilding, the idea that we can integrate natural ecosystems into our recreational living spaces. And this would undoubtedly bring a lot more health to people, in addition to their connection to nature, through natural medicines, being outside, being active, and the general well-being that people get from being in connection to nature. So there's a lot of ways we can do this, but this health aspect of it goes even further in that, at a basic level, whenever we poison the earth, we poison ourselves. Whenever we put poison into the world, it always ends up back in our bodies, and we see this time and time again. And so the holistic health aspect is kind of an integral part of this ecologically integrated society. So that's pillar number one. Then pillar number two would be transitioning to a sound money system, a hard money system, and a truly global free market, because the world has never experienced a truly global free market, interconnected and free of government interventions and inefficiencies that lead to people being unfairly restricted from the economic productivity and the quality of life gains that we could all be seeing if we lived in a hard money system that was truly free, a free market, and a globally interconnected market. So that being said, that is going to require some sort of hard money system that is, at this current point in time, best available to us with Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is going to be a pretty common topic, something I'm very passionate about, because Bitcoin imposes this free market, this globally free market reality onto the world. And just due to the nature of what it is, the physics of how it exists, it will slowly transform the world for the better and solve so many of society's problems just from being what it is as a hard money system that remains decentralized and secure. So that would be pillar number two. Then pillar number three would be describing, teaching, and unifying frameworks across cultures, particularly in relation to religious theologies and philosophies. So uniting all of these religious and philosophical frameworks across cultures and explaining and teaching the unification between them, and popularizing the understanding of the unification and the metaphysics in general that corresponds to these frameworks and that interconnects all these frameworks, because people largely don't have a strong metaphysical understanding across society because it's not part of our culture to really invest these metaphysical questions very deeply. It's sort of reserved for people who are more into it, but it's not really a normal topic of discussion, at least in the West. And of course, this differs around the world. So that would be those three things: an ecologically integrated society, a fair hard money system, global free market economy, and unifying metaphysical frameworks. Those three pillars, I would say, are, if we address them, could be the most efficient things to address to accelerate the transformation from the current Earth into the new Earth. So with that being said, that is kind of my idea of the new Earth, my mission in relation to the new Earth and in relation to life. So just wanted to start off by saying that.
Yeah, those three pillars are crucial for how we can actually make this transition possible. It's inevitable, but we can make it way more smoothly. And I think those pillars are really good ways of showing what it really takes and what we need to change, and how unified those three pillars are is huge. Yeah, I think it's time to just jump into the first topic of the day with your stuff. Let's jump into it.
All right, sounds good. So I thought the first thing we could do would be to cringe at Donald Trump, because I just thought, what better way to open it up than with that? So,
Yeah.
President Trump, he says a lot of funny things, but sometimes he says some things that are just really just cringe. And so whenever I saw this, I could not stop cringing. I had to replay it. I had to look it up on the internet, like what did people say in response to this.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we'll start with that.
Cool.
He doesn't believe he's beautiful. Oh, he says, you sounding shy. Go ahead, please.
Of course, no, Japan and US are very good friends. But one question, why didn't you tell US allies in Europe and Asia, like Japan, about the war before attacking Iran? So we are very confused about we Japanese citizens.
Well, one thing, you don't want to signal too much. You know, when we go in, we went in very hard, and we didn't tell anybody about it because we wanted surprise. Who knows better about surprise than Japan? Okay, why didn't you tell me about Pearl Harbor? Okay, right?
That's the Japanese Prime Minister
You
right
believe
there.
in surprise, I think much more so than us. And we had to surprise him, and we did. And because of that surprise, we knocked out, the first 2 days, we probably knocked out 50% of what we... And
All right,
much
that's
more
pretty
than
much
we
it. That's pretty much it. Really, just like, I mean, the Japanese Prime Minister, you know, she was stone cold. She really didn't, you know, she didn't wince too hard. She didn't, you know, she definitely didn't laugh. But her face really remained kind of the same expression she had. So,
Politician.
yeah, props to her for that. She's good for that. But man, just talk about cringe, man. Just sitting down, Trump is sitting down with the Japanese Prime Minister and then makes a Pearl Harbor joke in response to asking why he didn't let Japan know about the attack on Iran. And I just...
Yeah, I think that sums up kind of what the state of the United States is in right now.
Yeah,
Really simply, like especially with this whole Iran war, which is going to be the main subject of this video, because right before we started recording, they had Trump calling the 2-week ceasefire, and we don't even know what Iran's saying yet. But yeah, crazy times in America for sure.
Very crazy times, yeah. So that, you know, there's not too much to dive into detail about that clip, but it's just, I just couldn't believe it when I saw it. So, you know, I just feel like there's some things you're not supposed to say, you know, in situations like that as the president, but Trump doesn't care. He just says what he wants. And I guess that's why some people like him. And so, you know, I do respect him for that, but, you know, sometimes it comes to bite him, I would say, and that would be one of those examples. So
For sure.
To do more like helicopter money type stuff to re-stimulate. And I had even read an article in mid 2019 called, I think it was called, is this a bond bubble, or are we in a bond bubble, or is this the new normal? And it was a whole thing, kind of like how bonds work. I was looking at the fact that there was now 18 trillion in negative yielding bonds in the world, mostly in Europe and Japan, let alone very low positive interest rates in the U.S. And I took the stance that this is a bubble. This is like people always ask me if the stock market might crash. I was like, I'm far more worried about bonds at this time. And I even talked about it. I was like, people have gotten so used to disinflation, they don't realize that the next time we have a major recession, central banks and governments can do crazy things. Like I didn't have obviously COVID in my mind, but I was like, basically they can do much larger monetized, like they can always create inflation.
Yeah.
That they have no problem creating that if they want to. Australia had a bigger than normal money supply growth compared to inflation because you were getting all this investment from China and all this demand of commodities from China.
Yep.
And then in the whole developed world throughout especially the 90s and the 2000s, when you had the rise of offshoring, China, and just in general automation, so even domestic automation, they dramatically lowered the cost of manufacturing. And that was disinflationary. And where inflation showed up then was things that were not getting automated. So hospital services, education services, anything that required other workers in developed countries doing things for you in some way. That's the part that wasn't getting offset by this productivity growth. So you had kind of pockets of inflation and pockets of disinflation. Going forward, you know, we've already kind of optimized a lot of what we're going to get out of globalization, manufacturing automation, that sort of stuff, which means that kind of really the next realm to tackle is to try to make some of those white collar services less expensive, more, you know, less human labor intensive. And so I do think that AI is, you know, it's kind of the next major thing where depending on how good that technology can get and how efficient it can be used, that can keep costs down. And obviously, you know, just like how manufacturing automation and offshoring had, you know, there were losers and winners from that because in the U.S. we had the Rust Belt, for example.
Yeah.
The U.K. is also at part of times been hollowed out industrially.
Definitely.
And so there's losers to it, but from a productivity growth standpoint, AI is kind of the main thing. There's no other.
All right, so stitching those two clips together, Clip number one was talking about the bond market. How, by the way, this is Lynn Alden. She's a very famous economic analyst. She's someone I've been following for years, since 2020. Um, I read a lot and watch a lot of her stuff. Big fan. So she's really good at what she does. And so first clip, she's talking about the bond bubble, essentially that the U.S. government makes these bonds and loans them out to the world. So other foreign nations as well as corporations within the United States buy their bonds, and this is what backs the US dollar. So because the US government is going to pay interest on these bonds, uh, other governments and corporations, they want to buy the bonds. And if the US government can't pay the interest on these bonds, or the interest on these bonds is less than the inflation rate, then people sell their bonds. And whenever people sell their bonds, then really bad things happen, because whenever the bond market becomes illiquid or it becomes flooded with supply and is lacking demand, then the US government has to step in and print the money to buy the bonds. And so this leads to inflation. And that connects us to clip number two, which is where Lynn talks about how inflation does not spread evenly throughout the economy. So she mentioned the Rust Belt. And what happened was, whenever we opened up world trade within China joined the World Trade Organization, we offshored our manufacturing base to China, and we lost our great manufacturing sector that was the Rust Belt. And so this was sort of the result of a market inefficiency being dispersed over time. However, there's the caveat detail that China was subsidizing their manufacturing. So it's not exactly free market, right? A lot of people accuse China of artificially buffing their capacity to manufacture, and then because of that, unfairly taking away the ability for free markets, or at least more free markets like America, to do their manufacturing. And so then Lynn points to, okay, well, AI is really the only future area where we can see productive growth, in at least a significant fashion. And why is that important? Well, because productivity growth is currently the U.S. government's only strategy to combat inflation, rising inflation. And so whenever you have a bond bubble that the U.S. government has, because the U.S. government is the global reserve currency, the U.S. government created this bond bubble, this U.S. dollar bubble, by making itself the reserve currency of the world on purpose, because the bubble works to our favor until it pops, of course. Because whenever we have the bubble, our dollar is stronger at buying products manufactured throughout the world. So we get to buy things for cheaper just because the world uses the US dollar as the reserve currency. So this works to our benefit. We get cheap stuff from China until we hollow out our industrial base, like the Rust Belt, and then our economy becomes financialized. It's an asymmetry essentially that we create by financializing our economy. Now we don't have the capacity to build stuff. We've hollowed out our industrial base, as I said. So this then becomes an issue that does relate to the Iran war, in that whenever you can't manufacture, then China manufactures all of your weapons. Your military industrial capacity is in China. And so that leads us to the current issue that we have with Iran, that we bit off more than we can chew. And we actually can't produce enough to successfully combat Iran's missiles and drones and reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which is currently rocking the world economy. And so to go deeper on that, the Strait of Hormuz being closed is going to create energy inflation. So energy gets more expensive. And whenever that happens, foreign nations need to sell their assets to buy the energy, because they need to dip into their savings, basically. And so what are foreign nations' savings? They're bonds. So we already have a bond bubble. So what's going to be the best thing for them to sell, regardless of what they have? It's going to be their bonds and their stocks. All their U.S. dollar denominated assets is going to be the most efficient thing for foreign nations to sell. in order to buy this increased energy, the more expensive energy that they have to buy because of the war. And so then whenever they do that, they crash the U.S. bond market
Right.
or crash the U.S. stock market, and then the U.S. government has to print money to stabilize the bond market, stabilize the stock market, and then we see inflation. So
Right.
it all kind of creates this feed into itself loop situation, and then to just specifically point out why the importance of what Lynn was saying with inflation that's not distributed equally. She said that where you see inflation the most is in the cost of things that can't easily be manufactured, where productivity doesn't go as far due to innovation. So that's why we saw the cost of education and medical services going up, while we kind of saw manufactured goods like technology goods remain sort of flat because we improve the ability to produce those at a faster rate than we improve the ability to produce education and services and medical services. So we see a lot of cost of living, average cost of living, going up due to inflation, even though we can still buy cheap goods, relatively speaking. So we have this weird situation where it's becoming harder to live in some ways, in some very key specific ways, and then not in other ways. So it kind of keeps people on the edge. Like, I'm feeling okay in this one respect. I can buy, a cheap technology item pretty consistently, but it's really expensive to go to school, really expensive to go to the doctor,
Right.
and so we have these problems. And so the Iran war, if it continues, is just going to exacerbate this, and we can expect, as much as this continues, inflation to ensue, and you can expect the inflation to look, as I just mentioned, to look asymmetrical.
Right. Yeah, I think that what's happening right now, when we really zoom out of this, the exact wars and all this economic struggles that we're going in, you can clearly see the transition that is happening to the new Earth, because this is just the bubble that was already created, the old Earth, and we're just seeing how it's collapsing itself, and why the second pillar is so, useful, because that bubble will pop. It's just a matter of time. We're keeping inflating that bubble with inflation, and eventually it has to pop. And so this is why we were seeing Trump just going after those old money systems, going for oil in a bunch of foreign countries, because oil, that form of energy, is so connected to the fiat currency and these old money systems, and why Trump is kind of hilarious right now, because he's just doing these really outlandish things, whether he's getting told to do it or if he's making the final call, whatever. It is just so obvious from a zoomed out perspective how we're just seeing United States, which is the leader of the globalization on humanity, whether it be through social media or just through currency. At least in the past century, they have been. And so we're seeing this giant globalization unified through technology, through fiat currency, now suddenly popping. So what happens when all of Earth's main society is collapsing? And this is why I think it's so essential to talk about these things right here and watch it unfold.
Right.
It's a very interesting story.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so a lot of people, they get upset whenever you talk about these things like, oh, you're saying that the US dollar is not going to be the world reserve asset or currency anymore. Are you anti-American? People get really triggered by that. And it's like, no, actually, this is very pro-American to be advocating for a truly globally free market, because actually what's in America's best interest happens to also be in the rest of the world's best interest. Right. Is that it's really in everyone's best interest that we have a truly global free market system rather than an asymmetrical dollar bubble, because what this dollar reserve currency system is, like, sure, it works to the advantage of America at some, to some degree, people could argue, but ultimately, in the long run, it actually doesn't. It only appears to in the short run. And so this is classic short run thinking that people think that the U.S. dollar being the reserve is good. This is really, it's fear and lack-based thinking. Is thinking that, oh, we have to extract the resources from all of the world. We can't have fair, free global markets because we are lacking. And so because of that, we have to extract from the world with unfair currency manipulation practices. And then additionally, also fear-based, because we use that system to back our military, even though because it was unfair, it was always destined to collapse in on itself. And that's exactly what's happening now, is that because the US dollar was the reserve currency, that was the direct causal link between us not being able to produce the industry required to support our military, to support the world wars. So, you know, it was destined to fail from the beginning, and only short-term thinking is what got it this far. So absolutely right. We see this transition to the new earth. We see the slow fall of the American hegemony, and then the rise of global equity, global free markets, because we see things like this Iran war, which, you know, a lot of people will say is kind of a small scale. Iran doesn't even have a navy. Iran doesn't have air supremacy. All they have is missiles and drones, but they can still destabilize and potentially even crash the entire global economy if we keep, or if they keep the Strait of Hormuz closed for an extended period of time, because really the global economy is like a house of cards built on debt. And if these foreign nations sell all their US dollar denominated assets, they crash the bond market, crash the stock market, then the US government can't pay stuff, so it has to inflate, and then we all suffer the consequences, and it trickles down through the rest of the world because of the way it's all set up, all these currency dynamics. You know, Japan, EU, they have some different strategic points to keep them safe, but still, at the end of it, what happens to us happens to them to a degree, and they can't just sell their U.S. dollar denominated assets and get off scot-free, because if they crash us, it crashes them in the end. So we're all tied in this mess together, and the goal is really to continue to tie us together economically through trade and, you know, codependence and exchange, so that way these wars just can't happen. These wars just become economically unfeasible. And so Bitcoin imposing a global free market on the world does that very successfully. So
Yeah, to jump back on that, America was based off of freedom. And so it's so funny that when you started your conversation, it's like it's actually more American to have this globalization, to have the freedom. And it's so weird that, you know, a lot of Americans see the reverse of that. They're stuck in that stress and that like fear-based system and not actually fighting for freedom, which, you know, at the root cause of all this spiritual pursuit, of this changing into the evolution of humanity, is that fight for freedom, is that fight for unity. And so it's super hysterical that you're like saying that. It's like, well, America was built off of freedom. It should still be its main principle. It's said to be its main principle. And yet most Americans don't even believe in freedom or experience freedom.
it's so ironic that it's just like you're saying, one of the hallmarks of American patriotism is capitalism and the free market. Yet our whole money system is anything but a free market. And so it's just completely ironic at the end of the day that we go around saying, oh, the communists are evil. You know, communism has been the most evil thing to Americans for, you know, I guess nearly a century now. And look at us, we're actually communist the whole time. Now, look, it's a spectrum. So, you know, we're less communist. America's less communist than China, sure. But communist practices, anti-free market practices are just that nonetheless.
Right.
And so we, you know, as Jesus said, some paraphrasing here, you can't get the stick out of your neighbor's eye before you get the log out of your own. So, you know, we're just being goofy every time we go and try to, you know, save all these other nations from communism. Well, we had a log in our own eye. We were practicing anti-free market practices this whole time. So that's, you know, probably a good reason why it never really worked out for us, and it continues to not work out for us. So luckily, the system holds its own undoing in its foundation. So its destiny was failure. So
Yeah, exciting.
Yeah.
Exciting.
So you want to get to the next clip?
Yeah. Let's jump into it.
On its own, eventually, naturally, maybe our allies will help us. And the contradiction within that is...
But not really our allies will help us. He even said, they got to figure out themselves, and we'll help them if they need it, but I think they have it themselves, like almost leaving it to NATO and some of the others to figure out for themselves.
Yeah, I think that's right. And there's a huge contradiction therein. We're the greatest military in the world. We are the reserve currency issuer. Our job is to use our deep blue water Navy to maintain freedom of navigation for the world. That is why the world, that's a big reason why the world uses the dollar as the reserve currency. And so if we say, hey, this isn't our problem, number one, that starts to raise serious questions about why am I paying the Americans for weapons? Why am I paying the Americans to hold dollars? And then also, at a more fundamental level, if we're winning, why can't we open the Strait of Hormuz? If their Navy has been devastated, if their Air Force is devastated, if their offensive capabilities have been devastated, why can no ships sail through there?
Why do you think?
Well, forget about what I think. What I'm being told is that, yes, their Navy is destroyed. Yes, their Air Force is destroyed. And this isn't where their power was. Their power was in missiles and drones. And I'm hearing we've destroyed less missiles than we thought. There was a story talking about this on Reuters last week where we originally were taking Israeli intelligence, and they were saying, yeah, we got 70% in the first couple weeks. Last week, Reuters said, well, it's closer to a third, which means it's probably a little less than that. It's sounding, I'm hearing very credible rumblings that more of their missiles were deeper underground than we thought. And the reality is these drones, it's not different for us than it's been for the Russians in Ukraine, which is to say something very important has happened in this last 4 or 5 weeks of war in the same way it happened in Ukraine, which is the very nature of warfare has fundamentally changed in a way that has arguably not happened since black powder rifles were used to take down heavy cavalry, whenever that was, 400 or 500 years ago. And that is that Iran is using missiles and drones to stand off the United States Navy in a naval choke point. And so while there's something called Mahan Doctrine, which is you control...
Luke, I mean, he said it pretty plainly there. Luke, again, is another great macro analyst I've been following since 2020. He's very good at what he does, great insight. And so clearly what he's talking about here is the key detail being warfare has changed. Warfare, just as we saw in Ukraine, like he said, that, you know, Russia came in and for the first time drones were appearing to be very significant in warfare. And, you know, you see drones taking out tanks, you see drones successfully, destroying things that are much more expensive than the drones. And a lot of warfare, at the end of the day, comes down to money. And so whenever you have drones that are so capable of, drones and missiles that are so capable of preventing the U.S. Navy from securing and opening the Strait of Hormuz, the balance of power in the world is offset. Trump thought he was getting into some easy, quick win, like with Venezuela, but this is not that at all. And the technology, the change of technology, is really what you can point to this is what people didn't expect, even though we probably could have expected it if you looked at Ukraine and saw what happened whenever they were invaded by Russia. But you know, you could have predicted, at least these high level people should have, you would think, but no. So this is a pretty fundamental change in the new earth, and we have yet to see how this will continue to unfold, how global warfare will continue to unfold. Is naval supremacy essentially null and void now? What are the implications of this? Does this, as Luke was saying, further incentivize other nations to divest from U.S. denominated assets like their bonds or their stocks or just the U.S. dollar in general? I mean, China and Russia were way ahead of the game in terms of divesting from U.S. dollars and switching to gold to settle their currencies and their wealth in. And more than likely, the trend seems to be the whole globe moving in that direction, in accordance with this aspect of the U.S. not being able to effectively secure the world with its military anymore, because it just simply doesn't dominate the supremacy that it has for the past time since World War II.
Yeah, what's really interesting too is that, like, we're seeing war change more and more, but when we're talking about trying to transition into the new earth, we're trying to see how does war evolve into not needing war anymore, because the whole reason why we're still having war, you can really push it towards the economic system, because we're in a point in humanity where we have enough technology and information that any human issue can be solved. And so the only reason war is still going is because of those lack beliefs, but also because of the economic structure that is in place. And so as we see, we're seeing less of this old war system, and we're seeing less of this old money system working, and we're transitioning into newer systems. How do we get those newer systems closer out of these bad ideas, these lack ideas, these separate ideas, and getting out of this war-based survival instinct that humanity has been in? Because it's obviously not needed in reality.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think it comes back to primarily the pillars that we started with. That, well, I mean, I guess it's a little bit less directly obvious how ecological integration plays into it, but just to say how it does briefly, that when you have people integrated with nature, they're happier. They see the importance of the simple things in life, and they are, I would say, less likely on average to be mind controlled or convinced that these wars are a good idea. They're probably going to be more open-minded, more free thinking, and caring more about the simple things. But then to the more direct points of the other two pillars, well, having a totally globally free market backed in a hard money system, moving away from the US dollar reserve currency system, is going to economically interconnect the world, just as we were describing earlier, is the reason why this war is so catastrophic, even though it's relatively small, you could say, because it's already happening to a large degree. The new Earth is happening regardless. And so it's just accelerating this process further and economically tying all nations together with free trade and fair government practices, so not heavily subsidizing industries or tariffing industries and stuff like that. These are all anti-free market practices. So being in favor of these globally free market laws and legislations and general dispositions and policy is going to be huge for accelerating this process. And then to the last point, connecting metaphysical, philosophical frameworks throughout all cultures. You could say a lot of the conflict in the Middle East, right, is due to these metaphysical disagreements that we have with, Islam and Judaism, and then, the different groups within there, kind of stemming back for centuries or a really long time now. So seeing this unification of metaphysical frameworks and being sort of integrated into culture and talking about it, teaching about it, and sharing that knowledge is going to keep people from this closed-minded thinking of us versus them, separation, as you were saying, fear, lack, mindsets, and all of these things that lead to these huge ego wars.
Yeah, I mean, to jump back into that first pillar too, when it stems from the nature and really getting people more in a rest and digest nervous system, parasympathetic versus sympathetic nervous system. What we can see clearly with nature is that it is putting us more into that calmer state of our nervous system. And what we're seeing with the world predominantly in that stress, neurologically, we see that when someone is in that stress, when the brain is on fire, when it's creating those crazy neuroplasticity effects, this is the point where the body is creating an opportunity for transmutation, requalifying of the body. So you can really change the code of the body when you're in that stress, in that crazy fight or flight. And so with these giant wars, with all these stressors in the world, we're really seeing this global chance to really requalify and transmute all of this negative energy into positive energy. So from a really large scale, we can see how we're having these intense moments before the bubble is popping, before the collapse of the United States, because we're really needing to transmute all this negative energy into positive energy, I mean, the Earth has already shifted towards that direction. And so it's us during the year of the fire horse, really. Are we going to ride that horse, or are we going to get dragged behind it? And we're seeing right now, the people who are getting dragged behind it are in that crazy stress and that crazy lack. And we're seeing it even on a global scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just like, one of those key ways that we can participate in this is to not buy into the tribalism and not just immediately want to pick sides. And then, because as soon as you pick a side, then you're stuck in an us versus them mentality, rather than seeing that, okay, really what I need to look at is myself here. I need to look at how I'm reacting to this, and then whenever I look at my own reactions and then focus on eliminating the evil within myself rather than the evil that I project outside of myself, then I'm able to transmute the energy, as you're discussing, whenever you're in this highly excited brain state from all of this fear and catalyst, and then exactly transmute that energy into your transformation, your self-actualization, you representing and living the truth of unity. And yeah, I mean, that was a great point.
Figure out it would open up this relationship with Russia. Like,
They're ordering a lot more gas.
where are you at
right?
with
yeah,
this?
natural. Just headline yesterday on Reuters: European Union natural gas imports from Russia up 22% year over year. So that's where it's going to push them, I think, on some level. Is they're desperate for energy. To Richard's point, and the hard part is energy and food are higher on Maslow's hierarchy of needs than stocks, bonds, etc. And the nature of the economic system we've had over the last 25 years in particular, there's something called the net international investment position. It's simply a tallying, a balance sheet of how much do foreigners own of U.S. assets versus netted against how much we own of foreigners' assets. And in the first Iraq War, this number was probably negative 7% of GDP, of U.S. GDP. In other words, foreigners owned roughly 7% more of U.S. GDP of our assets than we owned of theirs. No big deal. Second Gulf War, the number was probably up to 10, maybe 12%. Great financial crisis, the number was probably 15%. Since the great financial crisis, we have not had so much a recovery that has been talked about. Well, the U.S. has recovered so much better than the rest of the world. Yes, nominally. But what really happened can be seen in this net international investment position balance sheet, which is we went from a negative 15% of GDP net international investment position to today we're at negative 87%. So we didn't recover. We just hocked our family silver to China, to Europe, to Japan, to everybody that ran trade surpluses against us.
So the average person that paying attention to this, simplify it for them. Why is this so important?
Why is it so important is because by cutting off European energy and Southeast Asian energy, what this means is that they now have no way to get enough energy. They're going to have to pay a lot more for energy, and they will do anything to get it. What are they going to do? They own $70 trillion in U.S. dollar assets gross, $27 trillion in U.S. dollar in assets net. They are going to sell stocks.
Who's they?
The whole rest of the world. Europe, China, everyone that is short energy.
Are you going to de-dollarization? Is that kind of where you're going right now too?
Well, it's not even de-dollarization. It is simply a desperate reaction. If you have a pile of stocks and bonds, you lose your job, you need to feed your kids. Do you let your kids starve, or do you sell your stocks and bonds to feed your kids? That's not even a choice.
Yeah.
That is the position Europe is now in. That is the position Southeast Asia, Japan. And this is why you can see in this, people thought when this war started that Treasury yields, long-term Treasury bond yields would drop, right? Risk off. What have they done? They've gone straight up at the fastest.
Yeah, so I mean that we talked a little bit about this earlier, but that's just Luke, explaining exactly what's going on here with so the net international foreign investment position is that all of these countries around the world own so much stuff in the U.S., which you could say that's a problem on its own, that most of the U.S. is being owned by foreign nations. That seems a little odd. But, without even saying that's a problem, you could say, well, it's definitely a problem here because all these countries are going to be selling all that stuff, crash our markets, leading to the inflation that we talked about earlier. So, yeah, I mean, I'd say we covered that pretty successfully earlier.
I mean, he said it great right there, too. really summed up what we were talking about.
Yeah.
Perfectly.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's jump into what I brought for us for this first episode. I think it actually ties super well in what we were just talking about, because it kind of pushes it onto another side of what's happening in America especially, but in society. So let's first pull up the first thing, which is what we're going to be talking about is actually the psychedelic revolution.
Nice.
What's really interesting, what's happening on the new earth right now, on this transition period, is we're actually seeing the most psychedelic use that we've ever seen in recorded history.
Nice.
This is more than the 1960s. This is, I mean,
Wow.
it is increasing really fast. And so we can look at one of these charts that I pulled up showing the usage. I mean, we're having 12 million people around taking psychedelics annually. This is 12 million people just in America. This is not even talking about the rest of the world. But we're just starting to see this increase of psychedelic use. And why this is super important when it comes to what we're all explaining about with all these all these wars and also just the transition period is because the third pillar, this really puts into perspective of this union and this metaphysics of all these concepts and frameworks across the world. Psychedelics do a great job of that. But also, it's really making us question the authority systems that were really in place. I mean, you don't even have to take psychedelics nowadays to start questioning, the governments and the systems that are in place and that are failing. And I think we continue to look at a few of the other things. What's important to see with also the psychedelic revolution is not all of that, but we're also seeing just the rise in spirituality in general. And so people are seeking non-traditional answers and the rise of spirituality, but not religion, because religion is really just the organization, the institutions that are, for better or for worse, are creating confusion in society. And if you look at also the charts of lowering of alcohol consumption is actually the lowest it's ever been in recorded history since we have from around the 1939 in this graph. We actually hit the lowest it's ever been at, I think, 53 or 54%. And this is especially happening in the younger generation. And if you trust the older generation or your generation more than youngers, then you need to learn some metaphysics. The younger people are always tapped in more than you. And we're just starting to see, well, if they're not drinking alcohol and they're not having these things, it's seemingly actually the psychedelics that people are more gravitating towards. I mean, let's see how common marijuana is now used as a recreational usage, and also the legalization that is occurring with all these loopholes. And we can even see these loopholes in psilocybin itself. I mean, you can go to gas stations in America and find psilocybin loophole chocolate bars. And then across that, you go into all these universities who are doing psychedelic treatments. Now, since the 60s, it was kind of pushed back and we weren't able to do any research on it. But now this is one of the most heavily researched stuff is psychedelics and meditation and all these wellness practices. So it's very interesting to see all this, coalesced with this collapse of the United States government, and how you're seeing this unique experience where everyone's becoming more decentralized, becoming their own authority in their own life and spirituality, while we having forced this decentralization in humanity. I think you can just see the rabbit trail, the trailblazing happening right in front of us, how no matter what, we're kind of just marching towards a new earth. So it's just up to us. Do we make it a smooth ride? Do we ride the wave? Or are we falling off of it? I'll let you talk about that before we go into this a little deeper, because I have some more about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, seems the theme here is let truth dictate the authority,
Right.
not let authority dictate the truth, right?
Right.
And so that's this decentralization of religion is exactly evidence of that, as people are letting truth dictate the authority because they're questioning. And then the rise of psychedelic use goes hand in hand with that, being that, well, what do psychedelics make you do? They make you question everything. They make you look at everything from a new alternative perspective that you didn't look at it before. And it, a lot of people could speculate that's possibly why psychedelics were outlawed in the first place. It's because, well, if you don't want your people to question authority or question the nature of your systems, then don't allow them to take these medicines that are going to change their way of thinking and allow them to question authority even more. So, yeah, I mean, definitely really fascinating data to see there because, I mean, I had the feeling, of course, that this was happening, but great to look at it and just see it playing out like that.
Yeah, and we can continue down this rabbit hole because to me it's one of the more interesting aspects along with all these economic things because it's not really just, we can point to psychedelics in general, but it's actually just the wellness industry is actually the fastest growing industry in the world right now, projected to be 9 trillion by 2028.
Wow.
9 trillion in income. Yeah. So we're seeing this growth happening really fast, this push towards the wellness industry. And we can, say this is because we're questioning the authority being, governments, being big pharma and all these things. And people are just looking for the capital T truths, finding reality how it truly is. And so we're seeing wellness industry, we're seeing spirituality and all these more decentralized systems and all these more spiritual pursuits happening in the experience. And I think one of the huge things that is often misunderstood is that I think a lot of it's coming from the globalization happening through the internet itself. This is the actual positive side to a lot of the negatives that most people harp on. But the positive side of it is that all this information is decentralized. It's just spread out there. You can go find and research whatever you want. And especially with AI, you will find exactly what you want to find, for better or for worse.
Right.
And so like nowadays, the most popular people in the influential space is talking about psychedelics. You have people like Jake Paul talking about ayahuasca all the time. Yeah. Santa Cruz, a really popular guy now in LA, he talks about psilocybin and ayahuasca. And I think one of the craziest cases that's recently happening is Brian Johnson, especially after his psilocybin and 5-MeO experience. Yeah. So I have a few of his tweets that I love for you to look at.
Yeah.
It's just kind of him talking about post his 5-MeO DMT experience and just his integration process of we're seeing this guy who was so deep into the matrix of entrepreneurship going for now health, and now he's diving deep into psychedelics. And these tweets are showing like easily he's like seeing the matrix behind like, oh, this is all just written by my own story of my head. So it's really interesting, and I'd love for you to read some of these, and also I can't wait for you to see the last one because I think the last one sums it all up.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, you think I should just read it out loud?
Yeah, you can.
All right. So, in that moment, I'm experiencing the unfathomable nature of existence, stunned beyond comprehension and teetering on the edge of collapse or liberation. Locked in and holding space, Kate's full strength radiates and washes over me. Our dyad is the most surprising gift of my life. My expectations of life partnership were always tame. I had witnessed functional relationships, practical ones and dysfunctional ones. Never did I have the privilege of witnessing a dyad holding hands as they explored the abyss. What would that feel like, and what could be dared? Kate held the rope as I stepped into the expanse, steadying me with her unflinching devotion, never once hesitating, making the unknown bearable. Nowhere in our imaginations did we ever expect this would be our shared life. Yet the path here sits in parallel with my ultimate liberation within the reality unveiled by this molecule. I assume 5-MeO DMT.
Yeah, this is post 5-MeO.
Yes. Yes without condition. Yes without prerequisite. Yes to all things. Wow. I love that.
Yeah. So that was post 5-MeO. And here's a few more of his post 5-MeO and also post psilocybin.
All right. He says 10 days post 5-MeO DMT, my body can't sleep enough. I'll sleep 8 hours plus, midday hour nap, plus 9 hours that night. Whoa. Mine feels really fast. Sex drive up by 2 to 3 times. Kid vibe excitement levels about life. Dreams are vivid, more alive than I can remember. Previous normalized scrolling now seems insane. Societal norms generally feel insane to me. How we trade our existence for ephemeral things. I feel more self-aware and robust at handling conflict. I feel love more deeply. And then he says in another tweet, something happened in the past 6 months, post-psilocybin and 5-MeO-DMT, that I can't fully explain. The brain data helps, but doesn't complete the picture. Feels like a home I didn't know I was looking for. Oh, he's sun-maxing. Let's go. Wait, what? What?
Yeah.
I never would have expected that. He was so afraid of the sun.
Right.
Okay, so for context, my criticism of Brian was always that he's doing all this longevity health maxing stuff, but he's afraid of the sun, so he's a fool. That was always my critique.
Right.
And this is hilarious. 5-MeO-DMT wakes him up to the fact that
Right.
the sun is the best medicine in the world.
Right. And it's like give that guy credit. Like, he's doing a lot of great science before all of this, obviously. Like, he is pushing the boundaries of it. He's very smart, and he has a lot of good resources, and he has really good intentions. But like you were saying, it's kind of foolish to think like all of humanity has been under the sun. You know, the sun is giving everything life. And so to be afraid of the sun, it just always seems really confusing from a metaphysical stance, from a spiritual stance, from our stance.
Yeah.
And so now it's really funny seeing him dive into his own spirituality through psychedelics, like showing this to the world. He is very open about his whole transition. Like he's very open book about this all, which is
awesome.
amazing. And I think this really just emphasizes all the points that I was making before about this whole system, about the psychedelic revolution, about the wellness industry, and about how the influencers, the globalization is really happening through this internet, through the tool that we got. And AI is also making this really fast. Anyone can jump onto ChatGPT and kind of find exactly what they're looking for. No longer are things getting, I mean, obviously they're still getting a little bit under the, like washed under, but ChatGPT can uncover a lot of things and create a lot of new ideas and new concepts and put together a lot of frameworks that were usually isolated. So I think this is a very exciting time, and it's crazy to see how just modern society is getting into this transition period, how rapid it's happening.
Yeah.
I mean, just like half a decade ago, like even marijuana was still very, like people were very scared and skeptical, and now you can find it in grocery stores, and your grandma is now drinking CBD or THC seltzers.
Yeah.
So it's like, how fast is this really happening? And just like Terrence McKenna said, it's like, it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder. It's going to get so weird, we're going to have to start talking about it.
Yeah.
So now we're there.
We're there. That's this podcast.
Right.
Yeah. No, I think that's amazing. I love to see, whenever celebrities have these big public awakenings, like, Jim Carrey, Aaron Rodgers, all these things. So this is another great one to see. Just this is the pill that the biohacking community needs, right? And Brian's giving it to him for sure. So love to see that. Love to see the sun maxing. This is I didn't know about this at all. So this is my genuine reaction. This is awesome.
Yeah. Dude, epic, right?
Yeah.
Epic. Cool. Well, we got a little bit of time. You think we can jump into one of your other topics?
Yeah.
Before we close off?
Yeah, sure. Let's do...
Well, here's the thing. Firstly, it's not well enforced, but also most farmers are not restoration experts. And for many, it's easier to just pay the fines than to take the time and effort to comply with the law. Unless there's somebody there to help them. This is Ellis from the Black Jaguar Foundation. They partner with farmers to restore degraded parts of their land, and piece by piece, the vision comes to life. Their ultimate plan is to connect all of these restored patches of land, creating a 1 million hectare continuous chain, stretching for 2,600 kilometers along one vital river.
What we're doing here and in other farms,
Along one river, the Araguaia. This not only gives us a natural corridor to follow that connects the Cerrado and the Amazon, But focusing the restoration around a river helps the groundwater and biodiversity to recover much faster than it normally would. Genius thing number 2. On farms,
So this is really cool.
Super.
Yeah, kind of the idea here is that, well, one, if you're going to restore land and ecosystems, doing it in a corridor fashion is really, it's really efficient for, in terms of the energy that you put into it, the restoration that you get out of it. And the reason is because whenever you restore habitats in these segmented islands that are disconnected from one another, then you have a severe lack of migration in animal species between these fragmented habitat islands. And it's very interesting, actually. Even birds will not fly over nearly as much as they would if there's an actual corridor connecting the two fragmented habitats to one another. So whenever you do restoration on a large scale, especially if you do it along something like a river, then you get a really big bang for buck kind of restoration that goes down, because you connect all of these fragmented habitats that may be along the way, and you provide a route that if some animal were lucky enough to make it to that from a detached island habitat, that it could go all the way down a very far distance and then go somewhere else and spread its genes. Because whenever you have fragmented habitats, very often what happens is you have inbreeding in the animal populations, and this inbreeding depression creates a positive feedback loop, which makes it very likely for the animal to go extinct in that habitat fragment. And so whenever you have only fragmented habitats, it leads to a lot of inbreeding based lack of sufficient population numbers based reasons for species to go extinct. So I thought this, it'd be cool to showcase this as a very efficient type of restoration, ecological restoration, that can be done, just to put it out there that this corridor knowledge is really important.
Right. I mean, this really hits on that first pillar, which, I'm glad it's the first pillar, because, nature is actually kind of what we're all trying to deal with, in our own inner nature or nature itself. I mean, we created this idea that we're separate from nature, but, it's a one-to-one reflection of like how we're treating ourselves is how we're treating nature. And because we're so disconnected, we're having all these disconnected systems. So creating connected systems is really the name of the game to restore everything. So really seeing it put to work, seeing some people actually create these systems and actually apply these systems is always great to see, as we're also going to further this journey with creating a new Earth.
Couldn't agree more. That's a fantastic point, that when we create the separation within ourselves, we create a separation outside of ourselves. The disharmony within, it creates the disharmony outside. As above, so below. As within, so without. One of the hallmark rules of metaphysical laws of the universe. So absolutely impactful point there. So
Yeah, man. What a banger episode. We'll have some crazy ones. We'll try to do these every month. We'll get these out. Everything's so fast, so there'll be a lot to talk about always. We've missed so many other topics that we'll miss every time. But yeah, we hit some good ones today.
Yeah.
Good ones today.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Catch y'all next time.
Peace.
Peace.